Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast for the Timberwolves' exciting win over the Clippers, snapping a three-game losing streak. We'll talk about the change to the starting lineup, what that did for the Wolves in this game. Of course, we'll talk about Mike Conley's big second quarter, Reid's massive game, and Anthony Edwards' close to this one. A lot to talk about. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I am the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Tuesday, everybody. This is the post-game podcast from an exciting Timberwolves win over the LA Clippers, breaking yet another three-game losing streak. But it's all positive here tonight with the way the Wolves pulled this one out. Down by as many as 19 points in the second quarter, of course, on a three-game losing streak. All of the, really weeping and gnashing of teeth around, and rightfully so, justified around the Timberwolves' performance here of late. And they come into this one against a good Clippers team that had Kawhi back, certainly a dangerous opponent, and, lay an egg in the first quarter and a half, get way down, come all the way back, have to come back again in the fourth quarter after falling back behind by 9 points. And then Ant comes up huge down the stretch. The starting lineup change, we'll get into that. A lot to cover coming out of this one. First, though, big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. You can watch on YouTube. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Of course, you can also follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken. And a reminder about the new daily newsletter. You can sign up at LockedOnDaily.com. You'll get a daily newsletter Monday through Friday from Locked On Wolves. It'll have some stuff from yours truly. It'll have some other stuff from across the NBA and also some other Wolves links in there too. So again, LockedOnDaily.com. All right. So I already kind of set the stage here. The Wolves had lost 3 in a row, and it was ugly. If you listened to yesterday's show, I did something of a post-game pod after the debacle in Detroit on Saturday, which maybe that catches on. I like the alliteration, the debacle in Detroit. If the Wolves end up turning their season around, we'll remember that as perhaps the low water mark point. I'm getting ahead of myself now. They've won one game. But this was so much encouraging about it, right? The Wolves get down 11 at the end of the first quarter. They first of all, though, I should note, they make the starting lineup change. I've been clamoring for a while to do something. I didn't know if it was, I didn't think it would be Nas for Randle. To me, that would have been the move. DiVincenzo for Mike Conley. That was a possibility. That's what ultimately they do in this game. And we'll talk about the closing lineup because that will more closely mirror what I thought they should do for a starting lineup. But in this one, DiVincenzo gets the start. It doesn't matter early. The offense is discombobulated. Once again, they scored just 16 points in the first quarter. Target center's dead silent. It's like a graveyard. They get down by 19 points in the second quarter, and this thing feels, for all intents and purposes, like it's over. Chris Fit, I mean, I don't know. What do you? It was so bad there for a period of time in this game. It just felt like the season was over, which is very dramatic, but that's what it felt like. It was 44-25 just prior to the halfway point of the second quarter, and then Reid and Mike Conley, an unlikely pairing, go on a bit of a run for Minnesota. Nas makes a 3, and then all of a sudden Mike Conley throws it back like it's early 2024, and he hits a 3, makes a floater, which is the first floater I think he's made in weeks. I'm very confident. I think maybe there was one other game he made a floater in where he also missed 4 of them. He finally made a floater, so great for Mike. Then he hits another 3. It's like a real quick 6 straight points or 8 straight points for Mike Conley. Mixed in there, the Clippers make a couple buckets, but then Jaden hits a 3, then Ant hits a 3. And the Wolves push all the way back and get to within 7 points at halftime. And it feels like they've actually got a puncher's chance in this one. And then in the third quarter, there's a bit of back and forth at the beginning. And then Randle hits a dunk in transition that ties the game at 57. Julius Randle, I think, was scoreless in the first half of this game, and he did not play well. We'll talk about that too. But the Wolves tie the game in the third quarter. They have a strong rest of the quarter. Donte does some stuff. Ant starts to come around after having a pretty tough first half, a pretty inefficient. He had like 10 points at halftime, and it wasn't efficient. And Ant comes around. The Wolves build a little bit of a lead, and they're up by, it ends up being just a single point going to the fourth quarter. And then this is the thing that I think could easily get brushed past in this game because of, the fact that they won and the fact that they came from, back from 19 down. But they built a 9-point lead in the first 4 minutes of the fourth quarter, gave it all back, and then some, and trailed by 5 points with just 4 minutes to play after building a 9-point lead in the fourth quarter. Now they give up a big run to the Clippers. I mean, the score was Minnesota was up 89-80. And then they were down 96-91. So it was a 16-2 Clippers run from basically the 8-minute mark to the 4-minute mark, the middle third of the fourth quarter. Minnesota's down 5 with 4 minutes to play. And then Anthony Edwards takes over, as only Anthony Edwards can do on this Timberwolves team, and only he's the guy, obviously, you have to look to here. They're down 5. He makes a tough bucket, gets the and one. After the Wolves, by the way, and if you want to hear me talk about officiating, stick around for studs and duds at the end of the show. We'll talk a little bit about it. Ant finally gets a foul call, gets an and one. Now they're down 2 with 4 minutes to play. I believe this is the possession, I think, where Donte DiVincenzo locks down James Harden. Just completely locks him down. And it's just like James Harden makes a ton of impossible shots all the time. But great defense by DiVincenzo, forces a miss. The Wolves get the ball, call timeout. Mike Conley comes back in the game. And Ant hits a tough three a couple of possessions later. It's now a 1-point Minnesota lead. Harden makes a shot. Clippers go up a point. Then Jaden makes a crazy corner three. And then Ant ends up hitting two more threes as it goes back and forth. Powell gets an and one on the other end. And the Clippers go back up. Then Ant hits a three. Then Ant hits another three, which makes Target Center go nuts. The Wolves go up 5. They should have won by like 6 or more, but they miss a couple of free throws. Nas misses one, and Ant misses one. Some shenanigans on the other end. It ends up being a 2-point win. Far closer than it should have been. I don't want to get into it, but it was a pretty rough last 20 seconds, which we can laugh about now. But in the moment, it was like, is this happening again? Like, what's going on here? They're going to find new ways to lose, aren't they? But at the end of the day, this game was all about the starting lineup tweak. It was about Nas and Mike Conley in the middle stages of this game. The Wolves building their own 9-point lead after trailing by 19. Coming back from then being down 6 with 4 minutes to play. And then Ants close to the game, slamming the door on the Clippers, out-dueling James Harden, and allowing, pushing the Wolves to this 2-point win. Ant, by the way, 53 points in the loss to the Pistons on Saturday. He had 37 in this one. I believe he ended up tying the Timberwolves record for most points in a 2-game span. I care less about that since they lost to the Pistons Saturday. But as we said on yesterday's show, he played well despite the only 2 assists. I thought Ant did a lot of things well, obviously scoring 53 points on Saturday, but more good than bad. And then this game was one of Ant's better games this season. And it didn't look like it was shaping up that way based on the first, call it quarter and a half of this game and his inefficient scoring in the first half. But then you look up at the end, and Ant's pushing them to the win late in the fourth. He finishes with 37, 8, and 7. And a really strong defense, a steal at a pivotal moment in the fourth quarter. 6 made threes in this game. Shot just a hair under 50% from the field. Like, really nice Ant game. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit. I want to focus on the impact of the lineup change and the kind of trickle down in the rotations, what I think maybe the thought process was behind the Conley move. I want to talk a little bit more about the Wolves defense at the end of the game too. We'll get to individual studs and duds. Then we'll touch on Wolves Pelicans tonight. The Wolves have their first back-to-back now in like a month. So we'll talk about that here at the end of the show. So lots to get to here upcoming next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, and they start this Saturday. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. Visit their website today or visit the app to check out all the upcoming games. Of course, the playoffs start Saturday. There's 3 games on Saturday. There's 2 games on Sunday, and there's a Monday night game, which I believe the Vikings are the Monday night game, if I'm not crazy. And, first game Saturday, it's always the Texans. They're always in the first game on the Saturday wildcard Saturday. They are 2.5-point underdogs at home against the Chargers. The Steelers are 9.5-point underdogs on the road against the Ravens. The Bills are 8.5-point favorites at home against the Broncos. I don't know why I read it that way, but that's what Saturday's lines look like in the NFL. The NBA, the Timberwolves, of course, play tonight, Tuesday night. The Wolves are 5.5-point favorites on the road at New Orleans. Interesting that line's not a little higher. I know they're on the road and on a back-to-back. But the Pelicans, Zion Williamson, by the way, is questionable, although I would be pretty shocked if he played. But all that to say, the Pelicans have won a couple in a row. They both came against the Wizards. I don't know, Wolves minus 5.5. I don't hate it on the road on the second night of a back-to-back. So go check that out at FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, so the Timberwolves lineup change. That means Mike Conley heads to the bench, and that means that Mike Conley gets to spend more time with the ball in his hands. Put simply, I know he's the point guard, and like at first glance, if you don't watch every game, you might just think, well, yeah, he's the point guard. That's not really how the Wolves offense operates. Now, that doesn't mean that Mike Conley's role on this team for the last couple seasons and the goal for what his role on the team should be is like, it doesn't mean that it wasn't or isn't to slow things down, to initiate offense, to organize things, right? That's still his role, but he's also, that is true. Well, at the same time, he's not a primary initiator for the Wolves. Even last year, Anthony Edwards was usually initiating offense for Minnesota. Conley might bring the ball down the floor, but he was getting it to Ant, and then Conley was going to go find a spot to spot up. Well, with the addition of Julius Randle, they were doing a lot more initiating, even in the open floor. Randle pushing pace, etc., dumping the ball into Randle and playing off of that differently than what they did with Cat. It's just a different dynamic when it's Julius Randle than when it's Karl-Anthony Towns. And obviously they weren't spacing the floor they don't space the floor the same way with Randle instead of Towns. With the bench unit or, combination bench plus starters, or, when he comes into the game with a hybrid unit, and he's not sharing the floor with both Randle and Ant, then almost by default, Conley becomes the other guy that's initiating offense, right? So it does that for Mike Conley by allowing him to come off the bench and play with a different combination of guys. It also allows DiVincenzo to hopefully get into a rhythm with guys who are a little bit more dynamic offensively. And there could be more opportunities. Like, weirdly enough, even though I'm talking about Conley getting more chances with the ball in his hands, not playing with Randle and Ant, I actually think it creates more chances for DiVincenzo because he's not having to initiate offense. And DiVincenzo can play off the ball and can play off the catch and then can play his, get dribble drive opportunities off of his pump fakes because he can get, he can pump fake from 30 feet and somebody's got to lunge at him. And then he gets the opportunity to drive, to send the defense into rotation, to score for himself, to score in the open floor. Stuff that with the second unit, it was him and Nas. Like, they were the guys that were having to score. And DiVincenzo was also playing point guard. Now with the starting unit, even if he's like nominally the point guard, Ant is running offense. Julius has the ball in his hands a bunch. And DiVincenzo can play off of that. And it makes more sense for what his skill set is than what Mike Conley at this stage in his career, what his skill set is. So it makes a lot of sense. And even if it didn't work in the first 5 minutes of this game, it allowed ultimately, it worked well at the start of the third quarter when the Wolves did finally pull even at 57 with the Clippers. But the substitution patterns made a lot more sense in this game. And it ended up, the minutes distribution ended up being kind of funky. Rudy Gobert played 38 minutes. He led the Timberwolves in minutes in this game on the front end of a back-to-back. Now, Ivica Zubac played 35 minutes for the Clippers and is an absolute handful. Had 17 and 16 plus 6 blocks in this game. And I know the Wolves were trying to, as much as they could, match Rudy's minutes with Zubac. Although I thought There were a couple of possessions where Randle defended Zubats pretty well also when he did end up on him. But Randle ended up only playing 23 minutes. Now, he didn't play well in this game, and that's why. But also, Reid was great. He played 31 off the bench. Conley still played 26. So you still had 5 guys all played 23 minutes or more. And then Nikhil played 15 and Josh Minot played 5. Joe Ingles got in the game as the designated inbounder toward the end, which is the first time he's done that in over a month. So that was also, I guess you could say, fun. Why not? It was fun. So the lineup change was successful. I mean, like, I don't know. It as Chris Finch said after the Pistons game, he didn't think there was a magic bullet with changing the starting lineup, and it didn't work at the start of this game, but they won the game. Right now, Chris Finch has also even though the starting lineup had not changed, the closing lineup had, and we talked about this a bit on yesterday's show. Like, he had been doing a pretty decent job of pulling levers at the end of games, and I know that they've lost some close games, but in general, I thought end of game rotations over the past several weeks through this really tough stretch in the schedule, even through some of the losing streaks, some of the bad losses like the Atlanta losses, stuff like that. I feel like for the most part, the end of game rotations have been pretty good, or at least improved, call it since Thanksgiving for Chris Finch. And the closing lineup, basically, now there were a lot of offense, defense, rebounding, free throw shooting substitutions made at the end. But overall, the closing lineup was this new starting lineup, but with Reid in place of Julius Randle. So it was Jaden, Rudy, and Donte DiVincenzo. Well, I take that back. It was. It was Donte DiVincenzo and Mike Conley. And for stretches, Jaden wasn't on the floor either. And it was just a small lineup that had all three of DiVincenzo, Edwards, and Mike Conley on the floor. And I thought Chris Finch did a really good job mixing and matching down the stretch and the situational subs down the stretch to try and get the right guys on the floor at the right time. I thought this was one of his better substitution pattern performances as head coach, if you will. And I thought it all worked out really well. Like, Jaden played a strong game. He deserved to be on the floor. I know he only had 11 points, but he knocked down all 3 of his 3-point attempts, including that massive one in the corner down the stretch to put the Wolves in the lead. And Randle wasn't playing well, so it made sense. Nas was playing well, so to reward him with some minutes down the stretch, that's what it was. Is Nas was on the court instead of McDaniels, and they basically were just playing, like they did that. Well, actually, they did both. I don't want to just like read off the substitution pattern, but or read off like the subs, because it was all over the place. But for the most part, it was the lineup that people have been clamoring to see. It was, let's play a little bit smaller at times, and not smaller in the sense of pulling Rudy out, but playing 3 guards, if you want to call Ant a guard, Ant, DiVincenzo, and Conley. And Conley ended up getting to play some of those crunch time minutes simply because he's been playing so much better lately. And then we also got to see Nas in some of those crunch time minutes as well. So I thought Chris Finch handled that very well. Let's talk briefly about the defense toward the end of the game. I mentioned earlier the Donte lockdown on James Harden, which was awesome. There was also an Anthony Edwards lockdown on Norman Powell. And the Timberwolves, like, Norman Powell has been great for the Clippers recently, and he's been a Wolves killer in the past. He still ended up scoring 25 points on relatively efficient 7 of 17 shooting. But he got to the line 10 times, and I don't think he looked comfortable in this game. Minnesota forced him into 3 turnovers and only 1 assist. And Norman Powell, if you don't watch a ton of Clippers or haven't paid close attention, Norman Powell's been really good this year. Like a legit, better than just starting caliber guy. He's no longer just a role player. Remember, he was hitting all those corner threes against Gobert and the Jazz a few years ago in the playoffs. He's like developed into a real starter plus caliber player. Remember, Kawhi Leonard did play. It was the second game he'd played all year, but he was minutes limited to just 21 minutes in this game. Old friend Chris Dunn, the Timberwolves forced him into 4 basically wide open threes by design. He started, but ended up only playing 21 minutes for the Clippers. As fantastic of an on-ball defender as he is, the Timberwolves basically treated him like Josh Giddey on the perimeter. Looking back at those Thunder games from last year and said, hey, man, fire away. And that worked out to the Wolves' advantage as well. I thought the Wolves' defensive game plan was really strong. They allowed a ton of points in the paint early. Like, it was ugly through the first quarter and a half, but they ended up completely evening that out. Both teams had 48 points in the paint. Minnesota only had 13 turnovers in this game, or excuse me, 15 turnovers in this game. The Clippers had 13, but the Wolves did a better job of turning turnovers into points than they have recently. Still not as good as the Clippers, but I thought that looked a little bit better. And they just simply shot the ball better than LA. And at the end of the day, like, that didn't work against the Pistons on Saturday. That worked in this game because they did enough other things well. We'll talk about the officiating here in a minute. They got a bit of the short end in terms of free throw attempts, although they also didn't exactly make their free throws like they need to either. Let's close the show by talking studs and duds, and then we'll also talk a little bit about Wolves-Pelicans. Looking forward to that game here tonight. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Prizepicks. Basketball season's heating up. There's no better way to get real money action while watching your favorite NBA stars than with Prizepicks. Whether you're a diehard fan or just love some friendly competition, Prizepicks makes it fun and easy to turn your basketball knowledge into cash. Here's how it works. Pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. If you think like LeBron's going to drop 30 points on a certain night, or maybe Luka's going to get more than 8 assists, Prizepicks lets you make your predictions and put your money where your mouth is in just 60 seconds. I've been using Prizepicks all season, going back a couple of years now. Let me tell you, it can be addictive. I mean, like Anthony Edwards coming off of Saturday, I said, I don't know what I actually didn't play Prizepicks or Monday night, but I did say on the show on Monday, like, I bet his number, it's going to say, like Anthony Edwards more than 27 points. And I would have felt pretty good about that. He typically backs up a big game like that with another one, especially with this team's back against the wall. And that's exactly what you're looking for. Once you hit, you get your money back fast, sometimes as quick as 15 minutes. It's honestly the best way to keep the game exciting. Now is the perfect time to join too. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. No need to win to get the bonus. It's guaranteed. Prizepicks. Run your game. All right, individual studs and duds in this one. Obviously, Anthony Edwards. We talked a lot about him at the start. I thought this was like, it's hard to find two consecutively played better games for Anthony Edwards at any point recently, certainly this year, than the 53 points against Detroit on Saturday, which, as just quickly, like, the playmaking was good. The decision-making was good. The 2 assists kind of belie what he did and how decisive he was, which was an issue last week against OKC in Boston. Talked about it extensively on Friday's show in the wake of the Celtics loss. And I said, look, he's got to be more decisive. He was on Saturday, and he dropped 53. In this game, he was also both. As much as the shooting was a little off in the first half, he finished with 37 points on 14 of 29. He was 6 of 13 on 3-point shots. He was 8 of 16 on 2-point shots. He had 8 assists and only 2 turnovers, 7 rebounds. He had a pivotal steal late in this game after the Wolves had turned it over. I think Rudy had a turnover on one end, and Ant just got it right back, jumped the passing lane, and looked as – and he also had a play where he got an open court layup, and I saw him hit the turbo button like he was, playing like an old video game. More like, I haven't seen him sprint like that all season. And I don't know if it's like, he realized the moment, if it was like situationally. I know he was trying to get a dunk or layup in the open court. He was trying to avoid a backcourt violation at the same moment. Like, or if it's just like the bigger picture, like, hey, we need to win this game, or if he's just riding the high from the 53-point Saturday, whatever it was, he's got to bottle it and do it more, because he's so dynamic and he just looks different on your TV screen or on the court if you're there in person than anybody else. And he hit that turbo button at one point in this game, and it was nuts. It just looks different. 37, 8, and 7 with only 2 turnovers is a nice game. And let me tell you, he should add more than 4 free throw attempts to this game too. I thought he was appropriately aggressive in all the right ways in this game. Solid defense. Talked about locking down Norman Powell. He had good possessions on Harden and others in this game too. I just thought it was a really nice Anthony Edwards performance. We talked about the clutch play as well, which is of course the most important thing. But really good performance from Anthony Edwards overall. Naz Reid would be the next one for me. 18 points and 7 rebounds for Naz, 8 of 14 shooting, and he was only 1 of 5 outside the arc. He had a couple of really nice drives in this game, was active on both ends of the floor, active hands. He was 1 of 5 on threes. He was 7 of 9 on 2-point attempts. And again, off the dribble was very impressive in this game. Had a couple of blocks, had 3 assists and only 1 turnover. Fouls were getting a little bit of an issue for Naz, but he was on the floor for a lot of that basically that whole second quarter run that they went on. And then also for chunks of the fourth quarter when they needed, to close the game in a solid way. And Naz was a big part of that. My third stud in this game, this one's a bit tougher. You could go Donte. You could go Jaden. You could make an argument for Rudy. I think I got to go with Jaden. As fun as Donte was in this game and a couple of those deep threes, and he had 9 rebounds. He was second on the team in rebounding, which is great. Jaden, as much as I get on him, like he only had 2 rebounds in this game, but how big his threes were for him to go 3 of 3 outside the arc, for him to hit that corner 3 when he did late in the fourth quarter. He tied for the second best plus minus on the team with a +8, 11 points on 5 shots, 2 assists, 2 steals, 1 block. Yeah, you'd love him to get more than 2 boards. You'd love him to score more than 11 points. But I think if the Wolves could bottle this, it's not the perfect Jaden game. It's not really what you want from that role. Like, you'd love to get more, but this is, we'll call it good enough. Like, this is good enough, Jaden, but the context of the performance matters. And as much as he's struggled lately, as much as the Wolves need him, as much as the Wolves have struggled lately, I think his 11-point performance was a big one for Minnesota. The timeliness of that shot down the stretch, only 1 missed shot, no turnovers. By the way, 0 personal fouls for Jaden in 33 minutes, which is really, really growth for him, I guess. I don't know. It's 1 game, but no turnovers and no fouls in 33 minutes, only 1 missed shot. It's a really nice Jaden performance. Dud's going to go Julius Randle. He had a couple decent moments. I mentioned the defense on Zubats in a couple possessions. He had a nice play on the glass at one point in the fourth quarter. But 5 points, 6 rebounds, 2 of 10 shooting, had a miserable first half. 0 of 3 on threes. He fouled Harden on a 3-pointer, which Wolves probably should have challenged, but at the same time, I feel like they should have won the challenge. It was a dumb foul. Anytime you foul a 3-point shooter, it is, but it was also maybe barely a foul, if at all. Still, not a good Randle game, and not a good game for anyone who thought that maybe Randle's, reputation, role, roster spot, period, on the Wolves could be salvaged. They won, and he was the worst player on the floor for them in this game. So I don't know. There's more Julius talk to be had, but this was just not a good game. Maybe going back to New Orleans and playing where he kind of started his career rejuvenation several years ago. Maybe that'll help on Tuesday night, but just not a good Julius Randle game. And then my other dud is the referees. This was one of the poorest officiated games of the season. I don't often talk about refs at all on this show. Maybe this is, I don't know, second or third time this year I've mentioned it at all. The final free throw disparity was 25-17 in favor of the Clippers, and the Wolves were only called for 1 more personal foul. However, remember, the Clippers fouled the Wolves like 3 times in the final minute to try and put the Wolves at the line, 4 times, I think. So I don't know, that skewed those numbers a little bit. I think the free throw numbers were like 25-11 or 12 or 13 or something midway through the fourth quarter. And there was the consecutive possessions where Gobert gets hacked twice, really. The first one was close. The second one was definitely a foul. They didn't call it. And then he frustration fouls Zubats. And then the next time down the floor, I think it's Naz, just gets his elbow grabbed and slapped on the other side where you could hear the slap on the TV. Just brutal. They don't call it. And then they call a foul on the other end. That was a bad stretch. I thought overall the game wasn't officiated well from the crew. So disappointing the Wolves didn't get more free throws. Now, they were 10 of 17 at the line. They probably didn't, they wouldn't have made them anyway, but it was pretty frustrating to watch the game be officiated in that way in this one. And the Anthony Edwards, he only had 4 free throw attempts, and he shot 16 2-point shots, and these are not mid-range shots. He's getting into the paint primarily, not mid-range shots. He needs to, the way he's officiated compared to some of these other dudes is still just, it's not right. And at some point it's got to get figured out. I don't get it. Now, James Harden only had 5 free throw attempts himself, despite throwing himself on the floor many times. But still, the Clippers had 25 as a team. All right, let's close the book on this one. Look ahead to tonight's game against the Pelicans real quick. New Orleans is 7-29. They are still the worst team in the West because the Jazz have now won a few games. Now, New Orleans has won 2 in a row, but they both came against Washington, who's the very worst team in the NBA, and I think still only has 5 wins, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. 6 wins. They're 6-27. They beat the Bulls and Hornets each in the past couple of weeks, which is kind of crazy. But the Pelicans just beat the Wizards twice in a row, once at home and once in Washington. They did not play Monday, so they have the rest advantage and the travel advantage over Minnesota. They travel back to Washington, presumably Sunday night. We're at home on Monday. The Wolves have to travel to New Orleans late Monday after playing on Monday. So the rest of the travel advantage goes to New Orleans. They've also won 2 in a row. But prior to that, they had lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 games in a row. 11 games in a row the Pelicans had lost, and like 2 of them were close. They beat lost Sacramento by 2. They took Denver to overtime, and they lost the Clippers by 3. So I guess 3 of them were one possession or closer games. That doesn't make sense. One possession games. But then they got blown out twice, or they blew out the Wizards twice. So they also, Zion Williamson is officially questionable. He's been out, forever, basically, but I'd be shocked if he played in this game. Of course, Brandon Ingram is out. We know that. And this is the CJ McCollum show is basically what we've got. I mean, Trey Murphy scored a bunch this year, and he's the other guy you got to look out for. DeJounte Murray, of course, but it's really the CJ McCollum show. And if you can force him to be inefficient, or really force the ball out of his hands and try and make somebody else beat you, then you'll be all right against this team. He's really the only guy that you really, truly have to worry about from an offensive perspective. Again, Trey Murphy, yes, as well. And I like him, and he's had a nice season. But besides that, like not a whole lot to be too concerned with. They're a bottom 3 offense. They're a bottom 3 defense. Defensively, they're dead last in defensive rebound rate, so there could be opportunities for second chance points. The Wolves they shouldn't have to, crash the glass too aggressively, but it's not a bad idea because they should have plenty of opportunities. The Pelicans also foul a bunch. So if the Wolves can't get to the line in this one, then, good luck. The one thing to worry about is they are a good offensive rebounding team, and even without Zion, that's the case. So don't allow a bad shooting team to get multiple cracks at it, and that occasionally can be an issue for Minnesota. So, and the Pelicans don't actually shoot that many threes, and they certainly don't make that many threes. So there's going to be a lot of rebounds out there. Minnesota just has to do a good job of securing them and not giving the Pelicans multiple bites of the apple. That's obviously going to be the key here. All right, so Wolves Pelicans tonight. We'll, of course, have the live postcast on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube with Jack and Luke, as always. And then I'll be back on Wednesday with the postgame pod to talk Wolves Pelicans and hopefully a 2-game winning streak for Minnesota. And then on Wednesday, or I guess Thursday show, we'll preview the Thursday night game. We'll also get into some new lineup stuff now that we'll have some new combinations to look at after these 2 games against the Clippers and Pelicans. Otherwise, that's all we got for you today here on the show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. A reminder that you can subscribe to the daily Locked On Wolves newsletter at LockedOnDaily.com. It'll be in your inbox every day, Monday through Friday, all things Wolves and NBA. Again, LockedOnDaily.com. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.